Hello and welcome to episode 29 of March to the Sea, the Vandals Let's Play series for Total War Attila. Last time, Vithericus and Gismus launched attacks into Parthia, with Vithericus taking over the Silk Road trade nexus at Merv, and Gismus going even further north into Dagestan. To the south, Geilamir and Agila struck down the last of the Sassanids' field armies in Spahan, and then put an end to the once great empire at their final settlement of Isatis. Genseric stood guard over Aquileia against the Huns massing on the border of the region, finally prompted to action by the appearance of Attila. Alaric and the Oath confronted Attila and his army in a nighttime assault that left the Hunnic king badly injured, but the young Vandal commander exposed in the field and surrounded by far superior numbers of enemies. With the situation appearing grim, Genseric received word of the completion of the Pentarchy seats at all 5 sites, and inspired with a sense of righteous purpose, both he and Tea led their forces against the Huns who were driven from the region. Attila was slain by Tea and his men, but the young general did not survive the battle, struck down by a Hunnic arrow. The Huns are stunned by the loss of their seemingly invincible leader, but their numbers and power remain strong in spite of this setback. As Genseric organizes the European armies for an offensive to drive the Huns completely from the land, the Arian Church have gained enormous political power from their prophecy apparently having been fulfilled, and their leaders demand that the Vandal purge of heretics and heathen be completed.
Very well, Gismus. I'll accept the baptism of the Lady Sunilda, and my rebirth, as you call it, as an Arian Christian. As you know, I'm a pragmatist, and it's simply become too inconvenient, dangerous even, to exist as a pagan in this regime. I owe no particular allegiance to Tyr or Woden. They are simply the gods of my forefathers, and if this Christian magic is real, that it can destroy the fearsome king of the Huns, I certainly would like to enjoy the favor of the Christian God. But don't think this means I'm working for charity. There's a magnificent place in the Far East from which comes jade, exotic spices, and silk, all of it passing through this ancient city by camel caravan or circling the Arabian coast to the south by ship. These luxuries are all obscenely expensive, and I can only imagine the opulence and grandeur of their land of origin. The route by land is slow and plodding, but the route by sea is discontinuous and fraught with danger, the flow of trade interrupted by land passages through Mesopotamia, Syria, or Egypt. If only there were a continuous sea route to the Mediterranean, it would become a river of gold.
Agila and Geilamir continue recouping their depleted armies at Isatis and at the northern border of the former Sassanid satrapy of Auria, with whom we remain at war, while Sindrid investigates the defenses of their city of Phra. To the north, Dromiate scouts the Avrigid-held Trans-Caspian territories of Kath and Siaku. Finding the settlement poorly defended, he sends word to both Vithericus and Gismus, who advance their armies into the region of Kath, indifferent to the protests of the local inhabitants. In Europe, my forces on the Adriatic coast are still licking their wounds from the climactic battle with the Huns last episode. Hunneric remains locked in an extended siege at Tuliferdum, his army having suffered through the cold winter and early spring, but now with signs of attrition being seen on both sides of the wall, as the defenders are suffering from famine and economic blockade. With the city defenses weakening and several more months of warm weather remaining, we'll let the siege continue to soften the defenders a bit longer before assailing the walls. With Attila gone, the Huns seem to have lost their sense of direction, if not their strength, and their hordes move in all directions, with 2 crossing the Danube to lay siege to the Sclavenian-held city of Serdica, while several more hordes navigate the Western Alps to approach Octodurum and Vesantio in Gaul. A small group of Abarshar rebels assault Agila's weakened garrison at Isatis, but their own army, weakened by constant war and attrition, is no match for the defenders. I fill the empty governor position at Galicia, which is a fairly lucrative province with its gold mine. with Ulithus, an intelligent 35-year-old man who is a dignitary among the other Vandal nobles. His dignitary trait will add to the taxable income of the province, and add to that a library and personal retainer that further increases provincial tax income. Evidently, there's a price to be paid for a Galicia Public Library card. On top of everything else, I set up the almsgiving edict in the province that adds another 5% to the total taxable income, so we should see our income creep up a bit next turn. With Vithericus and Gismus poised to strike at Transcaspia, I declare war on the Afrigids, and Vithericus leads the charge into Cath, which is defended by a very depleted enemy army and small garrison, neither of which can stand up to the combined might of the Madness and the Brothers of Stone. Gismus and Dromiate move in towards Siacu, while Vithericus and his men loot and burn Cath. I don't have any particular need for this territory. I just want to destroy the faction, secure my border, and move on. Geilamir is still recruiting just off the northern border of Aria, and at Isatis, Aquileia adds some elite Alani noble cavalry to fill out the ranks of the giants, and these will be ready in 2 turns. In Europe, the Seekers of Glory chase off the Blades of the Steppe, one of the Hun hordes that fled Aquileia in the wake of Attila's death, while Turismod, the new commander of the Glorious Reavers, brings his own army north through Verunum to cut off the horde's western escape. Trapped between both forces, the Huns are eliminated. Turismod then replenishes the Glorious Reavers by merging and disbanding the depleted obsolete regiments and replacing them with some Alani noble horsemen and Germanic spearmasters. Likewise, the Carian Crows who are passing through Casurgis finally do away with their obsolete Germanic warband units, and begin the somewhat lengthy recruitment and training of Swabian swordsmen. Hermenegild brings the Children of the Forest south through Ostrogothic-held Augusta Vendelicorum, followed by Argibald and the Blood Boars. Huneric's siege of Tuliferdum has gone on long enough to tip the balance bar in our favor. While I could wait another turn to get an even more favorable result without suffering winter attrition, there's now a Hunnic horde heading west along the coast of the Baltic Sea, at Anglican-held Rugion. With his task complete and his mission fulfilled, Genseric departs the port of Aquileia, sailing south into the Adriatic Sea. During the intern phase, the Huns eliminate a Marcomanni horde south of the Danube River, while Serdica remains under siege. The hordes clustered in the Western Alps essentially stay put, moving only very little. The horde at Rugion does head west, now almost to the walls of Tuliferdum. Parthian rebels strike back at Dagestan. As the time spent in such a minor and ultimately meaningless confrontation. The Parthian insurgents gains the upper hand in the battle, slaughtering my small garrison, and the Parthian faction is thereby re-established. Geilamir's loyalty has been waning, and as his personal traits suggest, he's become dangerous to the royal family. This poses an even larger problem, since he no longer appears on our faction page. He was one of the characters who briefly appeared as part of the royal family due to a relationship that has since disappeared, and I don't recall which one at this point. While he was on the faction tree, he was married to the brutal Axumite princess Tariqua. This has evidently shifted his loyalty to the Axumite faction, who are in turn a tributary state of the Eastern Roman Empire. We'll see where Geilamir's loyalty is next turn before reaching any conclusion. But for now he obeys orders and brings the Solitude south to Furah to besiege the city, a surprisingly even auto-resolve chance, given the cracked troops in the Solitude. With Aguila still rebuilding the giants for another turn, the Solitude set about constructing their siege engines for a full-scale assault on the walls of Furah. Gismus assaults the final Afrigid settlement of Siacu, again finding a weakened army and garrison defending the city, who the Brothers of Stone easily overcome in the auto-resolve. Subsequently, Gismus razes the city, ending the Afrigid faction. Vithericus marches back south to get revenge on the Parthians who retook their settlement of Dagestan after the rebellion. After capturing and executing the rebels, Vithericus puts an end to the Parthian rebel intervention at Dagestan by razing the settlement. Back in Europe, amid an icy winter, the Oath and the Seekers of Glory move south to intercept the Huns in Dalmatia, as Turismod continues to swell the ranks of the Glorious Reavers. To the west, Hermenegild and Argibald continue to pursue the Huns threatening Gaul, but the Blood Boars are forced to encamp for the winter, not having the Warriors of the North trait that allowed the Oath to move freely through cold and snow. One of the Hunnic hordes destroys a force of Geats in Gaul, while the remainder in that area moves south, now becoming dangerously close to Lugdunum and Octodurum. Another horde of Marcomanns are wiped out by the Huns south of the Danube. As the slaughter of Zoroastrians continues on a massive scale in the east, and the purge of Tengri-worshipping Huns begins, and the tribes begin to fragment amid the leadership vacuum, we greet the beginning of 445 AD with a cutscene.
No mercy for the wicked, for they are weak. Guard our spirits, and keep us from eternal darkness. He opened the sixth seal, and behold, the sun became black, and the moon became like blood. Give them your strength. The day of reckoning has come.
We've completed Chapter 4, and reached all 3 of the bonus objective goals. The goal for Chapter 5 is simply to achieve one of the victory conditions. I believe this counts even the minor victory, so as far as the game is concerned, Chapter 5 will be quite brief. Young Theodoric, a statesman in the family and the illegitimate son of Gripus and grandson of Genseric, has recently come of age and apparently believes he has already met his soulmate, a young shield maiden, Eliande. She's a suitable match in age and gives some positive if minor attributes. So Genseric agrees to the match, even though it's seen as yet another example of slipping control for the aging king, whose influence has declined, although he maintains control of the faction for now. Apparently Theodoric has found favor with Genseric, since not only has he blessed his marriage, he's going to grant the steadfast young man a generalship. Galimir's loyalty has nearly hit rock bottom, and should my wayward general incite a civil war, I don't want him in charge of such a fearsome fighting unit as the Solitude. So Galimir is removed from command and Theodoric is put in his place. Theodoric would actually make a fine general or governor with a range of positive traits. He's taken after his grandfather, being a natural builder with excellent penmanship. He has a love of wine and is respectful of the church. Not only that, but he's a natural defender, which is augmented by his new bride's shield maiden trait. Actually, all that said, Theodoric's portrait looks an awful lot like Vithericus rather than Gripus, so perhaps he isn't Gripus's bastard, but Kyriacia Piso's. Theodoric continues Galimir's preparations for the assault at Farah, while Aquileia has finished his recruitment and makes the treacherous march through the desert east of Isatis to reach the outskirts of Farah. I had until recently forgotten to fill the vacant champion position left by the death of Kyrillos, so I recruit a new agent at Roma, a healer named Fastida, not a learned physician after the Greek Hippocratic tradition of Hermenegild's Jewish retainer Josephus, but a combat surgeon with a quick and dirty knowledge of tourniquets and other hemostatic techniques, wound closure skills, and a superficial anatomical knowledge of what injuries are most rapidly lethal. Trapstila takes the Mad Raiders west to the port of Camalodunum to defend the port, although he's unable to directly intercept the Frankish king, who, deprived of his kingdom, is raising a horde of his own to terrorize Britain. Casurgis is once again plagued with disease, a situation that can never be resolved unless an additional sanitation infrastructure is created, and that will require more holdings in Hercynia. To this end, Gripus takes his colonizing crows east into the desolate region of Nitrawa, competing with the Burgundians and Venetians who are squatting on the land. The Oath and the Seekers of Glory outflank and contain the 2 weakened Hunnic hordes in the mountain passes of the Dinaric Alps in Dalmatia, but are unable to strike this turn. Genseric has reached the military port at Syracuse, where he retrofits his navy with the new, incredibly powerful towered Liburnian warships crewed by his personal elite fighting force of chosen Vandal marauders, along with some double ballista skirmishing Dromanarians and bomb-bird Liburnians. The Larchen prowls now the most fearsome fleet in the known world. Dromiate, having crossed the Caspian Sea, reaches Allied territory in the Caucasus, and the Caucasian separatists-held settlement of Gabala. Vithericus follows suit, embarking on his own transport craft west of the ashes of Dagestan to enter the Caspian Sea, while Gismus returns southward from his expedition into Siacu. The Saxons get a taste of sweet revenge after years of putting up with Frankish abuse and the loss of their homeland at Toliferdum. 3 Saxons' armies cross the strait into Britain and hunt down the Frankish king with the help of our Londinium garrison. Hunnic disunity has gone only so far, it seems, as the 2 larger hordes in Dalmatia reinforce their otherwise doomed comrades in the Dinaric Alps, attacking first Alaric, driving the oath back west, but then striking at Godegisel and the Seekers of Glory in the south. Although reinforced by a strong horde of over 1,000 horsemen, the first wave of the Hunnic assault will be made by the small and relatively weak Steeds of Doom, led by the inexperienced chieftain Tarquin. Godegisel will try to strike down this initial force to demoralize the enemy, and then face the brunt of the Hunnic assault behind a wall of spearmen, with some very strong artillery at his disposal. Not really sure which direction the enemy reinforcements will be arriving, I set up the Glorious Reavers' infantry in a tight defensive square covered by spear walls on 3 sides. Godegisel and his cavalry move toward the presumptive location of the enemy's approaching force, and fairly quickly the Steeds of Doom come into view, their mercenary heavy force slowly making their way toward our position. Tarquin splits his cavalry out to either flank, as his mercenary Agathyrsi warriors and his Ural archers advance down the middle. As Godegisel clashes with the small unit of mercenary Germanic mounted warband on the left flank, he's tremendously alarmed to find that the large onagers have overzealously and incautiously decided to let loose with their first barrage right into the melee, in complete disregard for their own general. After the onagers are quieted and this gross negligence is halted, Godegisel swiftly cuts down the enemy riders as his own Alani nobles ride down the Agathyrsi warriors and intercept the other mercenary mounted warband regiment moving in from the right-hand flank. Another charge from Godegisel smashes the other warband unit, who are pinned in melee with the Alani nobles, and unfortunately it seems that Godegisel's first strike was a little too sloppy and obvious, as Tarquin himself has retreated to the advancing front of the larger Hunnic horde, who are now seen in the distance, his retreat covered by a half-regiment of elite Knockors. I'm able to eliminate the Knockors and the Uar archers before it's clear that Godegisel and his men will be overwhelmed if they pursue any further, so I withdraw my cavalry force into the woods adjacent to my infantry square. As the Huns come into range, Godegisel gives the order for the large onagers to again start launching their explosive rounds, which land amid the oncoming Hunnic horsemen, inflicting a few casualties but terrifying the horses. Godegisel brings his Alani nobles out of the woods to the western flank of the enemy, and the Huns evidently find this to be an inviting target, as several of their units break off their advance to pursue the Vandal general and his retinue, who retreat into the trees. This diversion has fortunately partially divided the enemy force, and those who stayed behind have found themselves overwhelmed with missile fire from the large onagers and the elite Vandal longbowmen, in the face of a nearly impenetrable spear wall. The spears are still a little deterrent to the Huns, however, who send a few sacrificial regiments to the front-facing spearmen and strike hard with the Jet Devil cavalry and the noble steppe cataphracts against our spearmen guarding the right-hand flank. As these clashes take place, Godegisel and his horsemen are pushed further back along our right-hand flank by the pursuit of several regiments of Hunnic horse archers, melee, and shock cavalry. As the Huns gallop in front of the spearmen guarding the left flank, the spearmen break their tight formation and launch themselves into the nearest unit of Devil cavalry, catching the Huns off guard with a volley of javelins in a ferocious charge. With the Huns wheeling to face this new threat, Godegisel brings his horsemen and directs the Alani nobles to intercept the Huns emerging from the forest, including Tarquin and his retinue. As the Huns begin to break on the left flank, Tarquin finds his regiment fighting alone against 4 superior cavalry units, and the deadly spearmasters closing quickly to seal his fate. The right flank of our defense, unfortunately, is not faring so well, as Hormedak, the other steppe chieftain, has broken through and mauled a unit of archers and the crew of the smaller onager. Hormedak isn't able to wallow in the gleeful carnage for long, however, as the Swabian swordsmen smash into his retinue and butcher his warriors, shattering the regiment, just around the same time that Godegisel shatters the Huns on the left. My solitary unit of Alani nobles out in front are evidently sufficient to make the Huns on the left feel the nearness of the threat in the wake of the loss of both of their generals, and there's a partial chain route that shatters several of the units there. As usual, even though the Huns are essentially defeated by this point, they're sure to inflict what punishment they can with their skirmishing horse archers, causing several more casualties before Godegisel and his men are able to finally drive them all from the battlefield.
Victory! This is your day!
The victory is enough to repel the attacking hordes and deplete their units, but none of the hordes are eliminated entirely, and the Seekers of Glory suffered tremendous casualties, almost 1,000 men in the process. The Saxons have seen to the end of the Franks as a faction, and although Godegisel didn't destroy the attacking hordes, all 3 of the commanding tribal chiefs were killed. We did indeed complete Chapter 5 with the minor victory that was reached long ago, although I never did bother to find out what the bonus objectives were, although apparently one of the 3 was completed. Gripus has evidently discouraged the Venetians and the Burgundians that were at Natrawa, and has evidently moved on in search of greener pastures. His men recolonized the desolate region and began rebuilding the settlement there. The Blood Boars and the Children of the Forest relentlessly pursue the Huns approaching Lugdunum, now almost in range of the closest 2 hordes. Bastida takes on his first mission, the assassination of the Hunnic Tengri priest Magor, and he manages a partial success in this endeavor. Alaric, Godegisel, and Turismod slowly but relentlessly continue pushing the Huns back further from Dalmatia toward Dardania. In the far east, Vythericus and Gismus continue their journey west across the Caspian Sea toward Caucasus. To the south of their location, Theodoric is joined by Aquila, and finally manages to overcome the Aurea defenses at Farah, with the Solitude sacking and then razing the city. During the intern phase, the greatly weakened Huns in the Balkan Peninsula continue their flight southward, away from the threatening Vandal armies. Consumption has now spread south from Casurgis to Verunum, and this is the beginning of a serious epidemic. Vythericus finally reaches land at Gonzaga, on the southwestern coast of the Caspian Sea, while Gismus heads toward the western coast, seeking a safe site to land his transport craft. With his reinforcements on the way, Eyolf sets his military campaign in motion against the Kartli with a declaration of war. I've invited our allies to the fight. At this point, any who are brave or foolhardy enough to break their treaty with the Vandal Empire are more than welcome to do so. The Thunder and Lightning topple the weak Kartli defenses at Tosp and take control of the city. There are 2 more Kartli settlements to the north, along with their allies, the Lazica. Aquila attacks the small army loitering outside the final Aurea settlement, Pura, easily overcoming their force with the added benefit that this military action has drawn out the garrison to their deaths. With the city now completely undefended, the giants loot, pillage, and burn the city out of existence, and with it, the memory of the Aurea faction. Following this, Theodoric moves toward the edge of the desert and the desolation at the former region of Farah, desolation bordering on more desolation essentially. His army has contracted a disease, and are also suffering desert attrition, a very poor combination. Arjabad and Hermenegild have finally finished stalking the Huns in Gaul and have caught up with their quarry. Arjabad strikes the first blow, which severely weakens 2 of the defending hordes. He's subsequently reinforced by Hermenegild in a follow-up assault that results in a mass extermination of the Huns in Western Europe. My armies in the Balkan Peninsula slowly advance, barely keeping pace with the retreating Huns. At Toliferdum, the horde there is raiding the region with impunity, and the matchup is about even on the balance bar, so Hunneric stays put inside the city walls for now, and will wait for reinforcements. During the intern phase, the Huns retreat all the way to Thracia and the southern shore of the Danube River. 2 large Kartli armies appear out of the fog of war to approach Melitene, which they have nearly reached. The plague worsens as consumption is spreading in both Persia and Europe, where the men of the Solitude have imparted the disease to the city of Bedesir, and the trade routes between Verunum and Ayuvavum have brought the disease ever southward from Casurgis, and still another nascent focus has arisen at Carthage. With all this disease spreading, Hermenegild's heretofore loyal physician Josephus has deserted his service, perhaps in fear of his life from the persecution by the Arian Church.
I'm sorry, my boy, but I can't stay around with all these Christian priests running about. It's become as dangerous as the day your men were running rampant through the streets of Rome. I want to help you and your father, and it's a duty to my fellow men as a physician, but you can't imagine how afraid for my life I've become as a Jew in the middle of this mess. If they found out I've dug up the cadavers and dissected the corpses, they would burn me alive, but I found that those afflicted with the consumption, as they call it, have blood and nodules in the lungs and along the bronchi, and I believe this illness is spread by the incessant coughing. I've taken to wearing a cloth tied tightly around my face and have not caught the disease yet, and I advise you to do the same. There's a colony of men from Jutland off the southern coast of Gaul, which has been touched neither by the consumption of body or of spirit that plagues your people. I think I shall live out my retirement from medicine in this place, and you may visit me if you like, although do not reveal my whereabouts to your warmongering relatives.
Centaur, the harbinger of the Vandal advance in Persia, reaches the next target at Harmosia, harassing the defending army there, while Attila and Theodoric converge on the region. In the Caucasus, Gesmus and his brothers of stone reach land at the northern aspect of the mountains, and Vithericus journeys west, traveling through Gonzaga to reach the border with our new acquisition of Tosp. The Carian Crows begin heading back west, ostensibly to relieve the siege at Tulliferdum, where Hunneric continues to hide behind the city walls. Gripus is unable to venture far due to the winter attrition, and he fortifies his army, constructing the necessary shelter to see them through the winter without harm. My three armies, scouring the Huns from the Balkan Peninsula, continue their movement southeast, but still are unable to apprehend the hordes there. During the intern phase, each of these hordes flee east into the Serdica, which is completely surrounded now with 5 hordes threatening the city. The Kartli beg for peace, but there could be no backing down now. Their 2 armies shy away from Milatine and retreat back to their own settlements of Micheka and Duin. Pestilence has now run completely wild, with trade ships departing from Aquileia carrying the pathogen across the sea to Antioch. Agila closes in on his latest victims at Harmosia, with the Giants now reinforcing Theodoric and the Solitude in their attack on the port settlement. The Macran king, his army, and garrison are destroyed, his people killed, and his city despoiled and burned to the ground. Another eastern culture reduced to dust and ash. Vithericus continues the attack on the Kartli, bringing the madness north to the walls of Duin, which can muster only a token resistance. The madness claimed the city, the regional capital of Armenia, bringing us a step closer to unification of the province. The Carian Crows are now passing through Casurgis, and Gripus takes advantage of the local smithy to make huge upgrades to the weapons and armor of all of his troops. With Gripus still a turn or 2 away, Hunneric takes advantage of the respite from the siege to attempt to replace his light Moorish cavalry with some heavy Germanic noble horsemen, filling out the ranks of his army with a unit of spearmasters as well. We finally caught up with the 2 hordes at Serdica, and Turismai batters these 2 armies into submission, but is still unable to completely eliminate them. I gather my armies defensively around the city and wait to see what the Huns will do next. The hordes have evidently had enough punishment, and flee northeast, crossing the Danube into Dacia. The horde at Tulliferdum also retreats, heading east to Rugion in spite of the winter attrition. Consumption continues its spread unabated, running from Casurgis down to Aquileia and now down the Adriatic coast into the Balkan Peninsula at Thessalonica, across the Mediterranean to the coast of Africa and at Peritonium, and as far as the Arabian Sea to the southeast at Omana. Gesmus heads further west into Caucasia, attacking the poorly defended Kartli settlement of Metskata, defeating the garrison and burning the city, leaving the Kartli without any territory under their control. But as Vithericus quickly realizes, still 2 strong armies approaching the allied Lazica settlement of Cotaeus. Upon recognizing this threat, he quickly pulls his army back to the safety of the walls of Duin. Gripus moves north, finally reaching the southern border of Rugion, nearly having caught up with the last remaining Hunnic horde not in the Balkans. Trapstila and the Mad Raiders sail west from the North Sea to reach the unfriendly Varinian pirates that have plagued the bay at Rhodomegas for so long. He dispatches the Varinians in an auto-resolve, ending their tiny faction in the process. On the southern coast of Anatolia, Genseric reaches the uninhabited region of Ephesus, recolonizing it with the Larchan prows. On another coast to the east, Theodoric and Attila make their way west between Sakar and Siraf. The Huns return in force from their short hiatus north of the Danube, apparently having secured more units through the recruitment of mercenaries as they chase off the 2 Gruthungian hordes. The Thunder and Lightning have lost their leadership, although, as we'll see, the situation is temporary, the result of a partially successful enemy agent assassinate attempt. I put Eutharic, a fearless warrior, in charge of the army for now. Archibald and the Bloodboars make their way to Duracortorum, where they will function as a Limitani defense legion for Gaul and Britain for the time being. Meanwhile, Hunneric and Grepus trap the poisoned arrows, the Hunnicord and Rugion, with help from Venetha Haris. Hunneric marches east from Tulliferdum, and the Huns are caught in between the hammer and anvil of the two Vandal armies, and are quickly dispatched. With his mission complete, Grepus heads back southeast toward the lands of Hercynia. There are still several hordes conglomerating north of the Danube, while the three Hunnic priests are spreading Tengri worship like wildfire in Dardania, or they would be if anyone lived there. I move my own armies to the east to defend the southern bank of the river, and Hermenegild brings the Children of the Forest east in case the Huns decide to turn their forces back west. Vithericus and Gismus continue their war in Caucasus and Armenia, as the Kartli have refounded their kingdom at Trapezon. Gismus brings the now fairly weak Brothers of Stone to the south into Duin to replenish, while Vithericus strikes out for Cotaeus. The Kartli army there would be more than a match for the Madness if Vithericus attacks in broad daylight, thanks to the adjacent Lazica army and garrison, but a stealthy night attack by the clever general results in a decisive victory with relatively low losses by the Madness and complete elimination of one of the Kartli's two remaining armies. Having now cleared away the Kartli, the road is open for Eutharic to bring the Thunder and Lightning into the walls of Cotaeus. We have a fairly clear advantage on the balance bar, with the Madness reinforcing the assault, so with Vithericus' guidance, the two armies manage to claim the city and subsequently destroy it and its governing faction, the Lazica. In Arabia, Theodoric and the Solitude return to Susa to replenish and gather their strength for the next assault in Spahan. Other than some movement by their priests, there's little to report from the Huns. A somewhat bizarre shift by the faction whose aims seem to have shifted from actual battle with the taking of actual hearts and heads to the figurative war for hearts and minds by spreading Tengri beliefs. The remaining Kartli army, weakened as they are from their recent colonization of Trapezon, head west, right into the waiting jaws of the Anatolian Romans who crushed their little army. I lost another general this turn, although this time it turns out to be permanent, and there has been no foul play. Quite strangely, the Quiet Life has not agreed with Archibald, who managed to get himself killed of natural causes at his quiet garrison duty at Duracortorum. Even though Eyolf was originally in charge of the Thunder and Lightning, I decided to bring him back to take charge of the Bloodboars for the sake of convenience, as Eutharic has done a very good job in his command so far. In addition to Archibald, we also lose the longtime spy Venetha Haris, who brought his clandestine skills so far from his home in Africa to the northern wastes of Eastern Europe to fight the Huns. And of course, still more spread of disease from our settlements this turn. With the Kartli all but eliminated, it's a walkover victory for Vithericus at Trapezon, and I decide to take advantage of the recent colonization to start my own settlement there. The costly investment to recolonize the region has already been made, while we don't have to pay anything excessive to convert the settlement structure since none has been built yet. The other half of the deadly duo, Gismus, heads south into Osroene, still replenishing his men but itching for more confrontation. The Vandal armies of the Arabian Peninsula are still replenishing, although it seems I may have declared war prematurely, as the Spahan have a fairly staunch garrison of 2 large stacks at their capital city, forcing Aquileia to retreat back to Susa, where Theodoric and the Solitude are still replenishing their army. With the Huns contained, I decide to take advantage of the opportunity to destroy the Sclavenians, who have for so long made their home uninvited in Thracia. Serdica is almost entirely without defenses, and it easily falls to Alaric and the Oath. A similar fate befalls the Marcianopolis garrison, who are overrun by the Glorious Reavers. This ends the Sclavenian presence in the Balkans, and their faction as a whole. The Huns again appear to chase around the Grotthungians, and their priests continue spreading their Tengri dogma throughout the land. A short while later, a Grotthungian counterattack appears to go disastrously for them, as it seems both of their hordes are slaughtered in the battle in spite of the nearby Geat presence. The Spahan are now going to make me pay for my duplicitousness with a very assertive strike at Raga, bringing their 2 large armies in tandem against the city, which has only its garrison defenders. However, the city has a not inconsiderable garrison, even in the face of obviously daunting odds and an extremely lopsided balance bar. I know I'll most likely end up losing this battle, but it could prove a victory for the war if the Spahan armies are punished severely enough in their assault. The enemy have several onagers, which is fortunate for me, but I do have some cavalry that could seek out and destroy the artillery pieces. Moreover, they have numerous spear infantry with heavy armor and shield, so my single-axe warband will have their work cut out for them. The enemy have split their forces with a small contingent approaching from each of 3 directions. Moreover, they have reinforcements that will be entering from somewhere else. I really have no choice except to try and hold the raised central compound with archers on the walls and spearmen and axemen at the entrance. My cavalry I put on the northern end of the city to see if they can make a move against the enemy general, his skirmishers, or his artillery. As luck would have it, the enemy commander has trailed his men by a significant margin, enough for me to launch a surprise attack with my cavalry. The Vandal Knight Raiders draw the general out further with harassing volleys of javelins, and once he's committed, my Alani nobles strike hard for the enemy jugular. With the Persian nobles pinned down, the Knight Raiders add their own charge to the melee, and with the initial shock of the cavalry strikes over, it's now down to hand-to-hand combat between the regiments. The elite archers inflict some very damaging arrow volleys on the advancing spears and javelins on the north facing, and this front of the enemy attack has been all but repelled. Unfortunately, the enemies from the eastern and southern assaults are making their way up the dirt road into the fort, and my axes rush to counter the incursion. As the first spearmen enter the fortress and begin fighting with my archers, the Persian nobles break and their general Cinemus is killed. A strong countercharge from the axe warband and spearmasters routs the attacking spear infantry, and it seems that the first wave of enemies have almost completely been repelled, as the last 4 spear regiments make their way toward the fort, 2 of them already wavering. My exhausted cavalry are too slow to intercept the enemy cavalry on their way to the fort, and the Persian mounted warriors begin riding down my archers at the western entrance. The Knight Raiders finally catch up with the enemy, but not before significant damage has been done. The axe warbands struggle to drive off the last of the initial Armenian spears, and I hope to be able to pull them back at least to the compound entrance before their regiment is engulfed by the Spahan reinforcements. The Alani nobles land another small but significant strike in our favor, smashing a unit of Spahan skirmishers on the western outskirts of the settlement, the horsemen pulling back before they make contact with even more approaching Armenian spearmen. My axemen, in spite of the tremendous casualties they've inflicted, nevertheless fail to hold on to the northern entrance, as the enemy general has appeared with his retinue of mounted Persian nobles, and they're trampling my Germanic warband underfoot. Burnaburiash and his nobles are stopped in their tracks, however, by my garrison captain spearmen, who greet them at the compound entrance. Unfortunately, as my Alani nobles fall back, there are clearly far too many spearmen at this point to stop them all, particularly with the Germanic axes in such sad shape. Burnaburiash gets caught in between the spears and axes who have rallied, and we've managed to at least bring down both enemy generals. My Vandal Knight Raiders get frustrated, chasing off the mounted Persian bowmen harassing our troops, and together with the Alani nobles, they smash a unit of Armenian spears from either side, quickly annihilating the unit with front and rear attacks. With the Germanic spearmasters holding the northern entrance and the cavalry still chasing down the Persian mounted bowmen, it's up to a bunch of archers out of arrows to hold the rest of the compound, which is not an ideal scenario, to say the least. The Germanic spearmasters brace themselves to face 4 whole units of spearmen, as the longbows look on helplessly as yet another regiment of Armenian spearmen take control of the capture point uncontested. My cavalry then chase down a unit of bowmen as my own archers sacrifice themselves to bide more time for the Germanic spearmasters, who cannot tolerate a rear charge right now. I've lost the Vandal Knight Raiders, but the Alani nobles and the spearmasters are still in the fight. Even though the cavalry are generally a poor match against spearmen, I decide to throw my nobles onto the half-strength regiment of Armenian spears still trying to capture the central portion of the compound. Again, to keep them away from the vulnerable backside of my spears, to keep the capture point under my control, and perhaps the elite cavalry can best the middle-tier spearmen. The fighting goes on a bit longer with both regiments wavering, but in the end the Armenian spears get the best of their Alani assailants, who break. My own spearmasters fight on, breaking one unit after another, but in the end there are just too many Armenians armed with sharp implements, and the settlement falls to the Spahan. It was a valiant defeat for our garrison, who, although cut down to a man, managed to destroy over 2,000 Persians in the assault, a little taste of Thermopylae for our Vandal defenders. Pontic rebels attack Melitene, and they don't manage to acquit themselves so honorably, being defeated in the auto-resolve and losing their settlement to the enemy in spite of a balance bar in their favor. Otherwise, it's situation normal across the Vandal Empire, with consumption raging unchecked among our provinces. Vythericus wastes no time in taking back Melitene from Pontus. Gismus and the Brothers of Stone shelter themselves for further replenishment at Amida, and Eutharic heads west to take Vythericus' place in the military crackdown and settlement building at Trapezoin. On the southern coast of the Anatolian Peninsula, Genseric recolonizes another desolate coastal settlement at Myra.
Your orders? For the tribe! Get moving!
Theodoric still hasn't managed to replenish the Solitude, with all of the pestilence going around, but he manages to convince his weakened men to join Aquileia in exacting revenge on the Spahan for the sacking of Raga. The two armies destroy the defenders at the settlement and occupy the city, unifying the province under Vandal rule, and reducing the Spahan to their single wayward army south of Raga. The Huns mill about in Transcarpathia, defeating the Geats, and one horde has come close enough to threaten our nascent settlement of Nitrawa. They're attacked by the Quadians, whose weak assault is rebuffed. Spahan haven't given up the fight against our faction, the odds of success notwithstanding, and their small army returns in an attempt to recapture their home settlement. Although defended by the Solitude, the city has no garrison of its own to speak of, and the Solitude are in very rough shape right now, with all of the units around half strength or less. Determined to hold the settlement and preserve my young general Theodoric, I set up my defenders to face the enemy assault. The noble Swabian lancers ride out of the northwestern gate and approach the western enemy flank. The enemy are clearly approaching the same gate due to its already damaged walls, although just inside wait the deadly Swabian swordsmen. On their way to tackle the artillery, several of my lancer regiments stop to engage a unit of mercenary Persian riders, who prove easy prey for the elite heavy-shot cavalry, even in their depleted state. As Theodoric plows into the relatively defenseless onager crews, the enemy general begins to alter his course to address my cavalry attack, but then reconsiders and continues his charge toward the city with the rest of his men, leaving Theodoric and the lancers free to destroy the enemy artillery. The Spahan general's impatience will cost him dearly, since he won't be able to bombard my defenders from beyond the wall, and his own infantry come face to face with the snarling Swabian swordsmen as they enter the breach in the walls. The question of whether Dolamites or Swabians make better warriors is about to be answered very clearly, as the two breeds of soldier clash in hand-to-hand combat, swords swinging and shields ringing as they trade blows. As Theodoric and the lancers hurry back to the city from their expedition to quiet the onagers, just 3 badly depleted regiments of Swabian nobles hold their ground against essentially the entire remaining Spahan army, and shockingly they actually seem to be winning the engagement. As the enemy cram their men into the gap, unable to advance or fall back, the stage is set for the breach to become a killing zone as the Swabian lancers hammer home a lethal rear charge, breaking the enemy general and sending his men into a panic that starts rippling through the Spahan force. As the enemy general Tiglath-Pileser is ripped from the saddle in his flight by a Swabian-flung hatchet, several more Persian regiments shatter and begin to flee. As my spearmasters round the corner, they confront the Dalamite warriors who manage to squeeze through the gap, but it takes a little further battle to convince the Spahan that their city and their faction identity are lost. Surprisingly, we didn't manage a heroic victory for the 10-to-1 ratio of losses, but nevertheless, I'm quite pleased with the fight that Theodoric and his men put up in defense of our new acquisition. Then we get a little bit of surprise, as tensions between 2 of our allies, the Asian Romans and the Marcomanni, have reached the boiling point, and the Romans evidently have reached their limit of tolerance for the Marcomanni raiding their lands. We're forced to choose sides in this conflict, and I decide ultimately to support the Marcomanni, given our long history of mutual cooperation and the war against the Huns. We'll leave the story here for now. With the Huns reeling from the death of their king, we destroyed their presence in the Western Alps and Rugion, pushed their fractious hordes back into the Balkans and further, pressing them back across the Danube into Dacia and Transcarpathia. The wrath of our eastern armies knew no bounds as they rampaged across Persia and the lands around the Caspian Sea. But even with the military victory nearly within his grasp, Genseric finds his empire beginning to show cracks in its foundation, as his allies' trust in the Vandal alliance, once forged by Godegisel so long ago, is eroded, and the people of the empire suffer with famine and disease. In dark corners and behind closed doors, There are even whispers that Genseric should abdicate his position as emperor. But with no clear contender among the Vandal royal family, an obvious alternative presents itself in the once mighty empire of Byzantium, who bide their time and marshal their strength in Libya, as war has broken out with the few remaining Roman holdouts in Asia Minor. Thanks for watching, and join me again next time for the conclusion of March to the Sea.